Okay. Hi guys, it's Penelope, and today I've got Breanna with me from Nevada. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a chat about how trauma affects us. And we've both agreed. I'd like to introduce you, Breanna. You can go say hi to everybody.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for coming as well. I put a note out on our ladies' Facebook group that you're a part of, and I said, does anybody want to join me? And I decided that every week I'm going to meet with a female, or maybe repeat, maybe some females whoever joins wants to come back on, like you might want to come back on later in the coming months. But it was very interesting that you said that, you're a younger lady. I know that I've, sort of probably double your age, I think, just about. And I've been through trauma and I've come out the other end of it. And I'm amazed at how the younger generations are just so much more on the ball. And maybe that's because of the social media, and the access to psychoeducation is far greater than when I was a child, because there were a lot of secrets when I was, there are secrets within families still.
Very true. The
Mhm.
secrecy of it all, the shame surrounding everything.
Yeah, and people are shamed into silence. And I know that I went through a lot of abuse, and it was only through having 2 years of trauma psychoanalysis between 2018 and 2000, end of July 2020, and also reading the Pete Walker Complex PTSD book.
Absolutely.
It helped me to evolve that understanding, that because I was so filled of shame and brought up told that don't tell anybody anything, and here I am now on YouTube speaking about trauma. Don't tell anybody anything. uh,
Yeah, no, there's a lot of strength in telling your story. There's a lot of reclaiming that story back as your own and telling it freely. There's a lot of healing in that.
Absolutely. And there's a graceful way of doing it. So it's not about, I've always struggled with the word when people say, when people have not been through trauma and they've used the word that you're, victim. I've never seen myself as a victim.
Yeah, I've never related to that term. It just makes me uncomfortable just because like the connotation around it.
Yeah,
Like, yes, something's been done to me and I've had to go through things, but I wouldn't consider myself a victim. A
absolutely.
survivor, absolutely.
Yeah. And more, because it comes to a point where, we can begin to be advocates and speak up. And for the people that don't, when we speak, and we do it with grace, we actually are giving a helping hand.
Absolutely.
We're a bridge to others. And
Absolutely.
I know you said yourself, I mean, I know that through I used alcohol for a period of my life, for my trauma. I was in a business, quite successful, but then I began to have meltdown. And when I stopped drinking, I wouldn't suggest anybody drinks, but what happens is, for a lot of people, is that they begin to use, certain things in order to disassociate, to not feel the pain.
Absolutely.
Have you seen that around you, or is there anything you've seen yourself? How do you relate to that?
There's I relate to that several different ways. First of all, like everyone I've ever met, they have some type of vice, some type of unhealthy coping mechanism, and everyone I know has been through some form of trauma. So everyone I know has they pop pills, or they drink a lot of liquor, or they're stuck in toxic and unhealthy relationships, so they don't have to worry about themselves and worry about what they're going to do with their future because they're stuck in the moment dealing with whatever toxicity that's familiar to them.
Yeah.
Um, there's um there's just so many people who don't realize there's just so many people who don't realize that there's not going to be any healing from that. Like, you're not going to feel any better. Like, it might be a temporary fix, but then
And
later.
I think there's a cycle, and that eventually the patterns, and begin to break down. And it isn't, what's really interesting about it is it's not to do with age. Like, it's not, you can't say, because there can be people that, I'm 54, for instance, and there are people that I know that have not even begun that healing work and probably never will. And there are people, so it's not that, oh, I'm a particular age and I'm solved. It's
Right.
it's different for everybody, because it depends on our psychoeducation, our own intensity into what our own education and our own experiences. Not education, informal education, but where we go to look to heal. It's like, but as we said with media, when I was a kid, like my first mobile phone was at age 30. There were no mobile phones prior that. Like this would have been, 25 years ago. Would have been 24
Right.
years ago. I was 30. So, that was just the beginning of, the big computers, the big computer boxes with the crappy little mobile phones that were like like toys,
Yes.
you know?
I remember those flip phones. Those were the best.
Yeah. And I think that with media, it does have its upside, that it can get people
Oh,
together
absolutely.
to move forward, and it can be used in a really healthy way to help evolve and with knowledge. But what I've learned is there are no quick fixes, and that we can still get triggered, and we need to learn how to deal with our triggers.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned before, everybody is different. So you have to figure out a way that works for you to deal with your triggers. You have to work out how much work you need to put in for your recovery. Like you might have more relapses than someone else does, but that doesn't mean you're not doing the same amount of work.
Yeah. And also that we all take things differently. Like somebody can have, so there's no, however, with trauma, when I've told people about my particular type of trauma, they said, oh, but I haven't had it as bad as you. And I don't like, when I do my women's meetups, I don't like to hear that, because a child is a child. So all trauma is like, trauma to a child, even the same with trauma to an adult. It's
Yeah,
trauma
like
is trauma.
let's rank our pain. I hate that game. It's
Yeah,
not fun and no one wins.
exactly.
Like, oh well, you shouldn't feel bad because you went through this because I went through that. And it's like that it doesn't matter. We were both traumatized.
And I've
And
even,
everyone has different mindsets. Something that might have been easy for you to deal with might not be for someone else. So
yeah. And I find it difficult for me, part of through the social media journey of healing. When I got on social media in 2012, I found some spiritual groups, because I didn't know about PTSD, complex PTSD at that point in 2012. And I got involved in some spiritual groups, and I was being told, oh, just let it go, oh, they're your parents, forgive them. And there's some stuff that, which Pete Walker mentions, which is, there might be extenuating circumstances in some cases where we might not compromise, but we can feel some compassion towards parenting that we received. But at the same time, it's really dangerous when we bypass it, because in bypassing it, which I can see that you're not, as half my age you are, you're not bypassing it, and you're doing your work, and also it's affected you in a physical way, your trauma. Like for me, it affected me that I disassociated and would use alcohol and recreational drugs in my 30s, which I stopped when I hit 37. So but the 37 I stopped recreational stuff. But it's a dangerous game that we get into with that, and I'm sure
absolutely.
you see it among but maybe your peers, not to judge, but we can see what goes on in society.
No, yes.
Yeah.
I've definitely observed just people not knowing that there's more work to be done. Because I know a lot of people, when I personally would talk about my trauma, it would just be, oh, just let it go. Oh, well, it's in the past, or just forgive the people who hurt you and just let it go. And I'm like, okay, maybe forgiveness isn't my end goal, but there's still work that I have to put in before I even get to that point.
Yeah.
Because
And
just blindly forgiving isn't going to heal
well, this
what's
is a
happened.
biblical term, and if we go back through the history, in the Bible, I mean, if we go back, in part, I'm an astrologer, do astrology work as well, evolutionary astrology. And we have Lilith. Have you ever heard of Lilith in the Garden of Eden? Lilith.
Yes, yes.
So that story with Lilith, she refused to lay below Adam, and she was cast out, and cast out and made into a wicked woman. And also 500 years ago, if we go back to Galileo, when the telescopes were being, made, for instance, and he was looking into the stars and the skies, and Nostradamus, if we look back to that period, the feminine would have been, the healing that was going on then, people would have been burnt at the stake for, looking at astrology or having beliefs about healing that were,
Absolutely.
so humanity is quite.
What's super important to me is that people are open for the discussion, though, because there's always going to be some type of information that you're going to gain from having conversations like that. So I know a lot of people, I'll be like, well, I'm not ready to forgive yet because I still have to work through this and that, or I still have to come to terms with the fact that it happened before I can even forgive. And they're like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to talk about that. And they're just kind of like brush it off and don't want to have that conversation anymore. And now they're uncomfortable and they're like, because most people, all they're told is that's how to be there for someone who has mental health issues.
Yeah.
They're
And that,
taught that when you have that PTSD, to just tell them it'll be all right. Keep on trucking, keep swimming and you'll be fine. But there's a lot more to it.
there is, because that, like for me, I got go through years of nightmares, like, in my sleep. So, people, it's not a balm, it's not a healing balm for everybody. Sometimes, as Pete Walker says in his book, we need a healthy amount of anger. We need healthy anger, and we need
Absolutely.
we need to get that out of us. And also, I think he was telling me that I'm the eldest of five, and you said I think you were the eldest of, I don't know how many, you were the eldest.
11.
That's
Oldest of
incredible.
11.
So that's a lot of siblings below. And I know myself that I was pressured into be into the mother role, as well as the abuse,
Absolutely.
of the sexual abuse I had for many years. On top of that, I was also forced into this mother role, so there was no childhood. And that's not that I'm,
Absolutely not.
it's not a poor me thing. It's a reality for many people that many people are afraid to voice. And I
And you
remember
need
when
to give grace to that. You need to give grace to that. You need to give importance to the fact that that is what happened and it happens to a lot of people.
it happens
There's
to a
no
lot.
shame in calling it what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that as we speak out, we're also helping the little ones coming through, because we're bringing light to something that needs there is stuff that goes on in the world that isn't pretty. There's trafficking, there's all sorts of things that we won't go into today, but there are these things that affect humanity on a very deep level that aren't discussed. They're sort of pushed to one side, and people generally don't want to hear it because they get triggered. So,
Yeah.
what you was telling me about one of the triggers and how you've been affected by trauma. So do you want to
Yes.
tell me a bit about what you were going to explain to me?
So basically, I also have a complex PTSD, and about 2 or 3 years ago, I started realizing that as I went through more traumatic events while I was in the middle of trying to heal my childhood trauma, that my body started reacting in really weird ways. So sometimes I would be in the middle of a conversation and I would just stare off into space and I would become unresponsive. So you could try to talk to me, yell at me, snap, tap me, get my attention somehow. You could drop, make a real loud noise. It got to the point where someone actually called the ambulance because I was unresponsive for so long. And we didn't know what was going on then. So I went to and from the doctor and they're like, well, you don't have a heart condition and everything's fine. And while I'm waiting, it took me about a year to actually go see a neurologist. While I was going back and forth from the hospital in the emergency room and things like that, I realized I started to have more symptoms. I got to the point where I started actually having seizures due to my trauma. So I would be triggered by something that happened or a
Or a
flashback. I would have a
recall,
flashback.
like
Yeah.
like a flashback. Yeah.
Yeah. I would be having a flashback and then all of a sudden I would just fall onto the floor and start convulsing, or just totally pass out and just not move. And it wasn't until about a year after that happening where I finally saw a neurologist and they gave me a couple of tests, trying to figure out what's going on. And they were like, well, you don't have epilepsy because it's not caused by an electrical storm in the brain. Your brain waves are totally fine. So we're not sure what's wrong. So
So
it
can
took a
I
few more
ask
months of
you?
going
So
back and forth.
can I ask you? So how did they how did they know that it wasn't epilepsy? Did they do did they test the brain waves then? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? How did
Yeah.
they do that?
So
Or did they do it a different
originally
way?
I had an MRI and an EKG to make sure that my heart rate was okay and to make sure that there was nothing weird going on with my head first. And then
Okay.
after that, I did 2 or 3 separate EEGs. So basically, what they would do is they would clean a part of your scalp and they would put little stickers on it and it's connected to the computer and it kind of monitors your brain waves.
Yeah.
So I did that one. And the first time I did it inside the neurologist's office for about an hour. Had time like take a nap and wake all the way up and nothing had happened. They're like, yeah, everything seems fine, we're not sure what's going on, so come back again. And because it's the neurologist out here, the appointments are about 3 months out at least. So
Yeah.
it took me quite a long time to figure out what was going on.
Can I ask you, is that because we've got a different system? We've got the NHS in the UK, which means that the healthcare is paid for through people's taxes. So it also
Mhm.
means that if somebody hasn't got the resources, they still cared for. People are cared for regardless of their what people are not ignored here. But I do
Right.
think that you've got a very different system out there as well. I won't get into political because I'm not into political stuff, but I understand that you haven't got this. I mean, how does somebody afford to have that done, or the 3 months waiting list?
Yeah.
Is there a
So
system?
out here, our taxes will go towards
Sorry?
helping other people. Our taxes will go towards that service. So our taxes will go towards people who have a lower income. You have to be below a certain income bracket.
Okay.
Um, but if you're over that income bracket, you have to pay out of pocket.
Wow.
Yeah, so you just have to pay out of pocket if you're above that income bracket. And if you're below, you have the access to the resources to get these things done. But it's such a long wait list because there's
I
so many
get
people
you.
here below the poverty line
I get you.
that yeah, there's so many people ahead of you, and the wait list is so long that it takes 3-4 months before you can see a
I
specialist.
get you. I
And they're
will
also
tell
a lot
you.
more stingy with like if they send you to a specialist because they want to make sure they absolutely have to. So I went through a bunch of different tests before I even made it to the neurologist office.
Okay. I get you. Here, I decided that after I had sort of a meltdown in 2016, I was offered some anxiety tablets and cognitive behavioral therapy, but it didn't work for me, the cognitive behavioral therapy. It was too, because I was having panic attacks. But I was offered some anxiety tablets, and I refused that because I'd stopped drinking. I didn't want to put anything into me that was going to start, you know,
Right.
dumbing me down. And I held out for therapy, and I was given, in the UK there's a place called the Tavistock Clinic where they train the younger generation of therapists coming through for the NHS, the
Hmm.
system here. And I had a brilliant woman, young woman, who worked with me for 2 years. And the beauty of therapy, which I never understood before, because half the time you're going there and you're blurting out every week, like for you know so many weeks, 52 weeks plus,
Absolutely.
and you keep talking, and the person just sits there and listens, and you're thinking, what the hell am I doing here? But
Yes.
understanding it now, you're building a bond. So where you've had a really insecure attachment style as a child, which many people who've been through trauma have got, they haven't had secure attachment, and this causes
Yeah,
huge
typically
amounts of
avoidant or
problems.
anxious.
Yeah, I was put myself in, I could be avoidant when I was drinking, but also anxious, anxious avoidant, and then anxious, so going through,
Yes.
and not so much now, but definitely even with friends, I could be that way. So it wasn't just in intimacy, it was just with people in general. You just like, I'm better
Especially
off on my own.
there's a level of abandonment as well. So those abandonment issues contribute to how you see other people. Because I know myself personally, every time I get into a friendship or I start dating someone, my immediate thought is, okay, so how long is this gonna last?
Yeah,
So when are they gonna leave? And then I look really too deep into certain things, and I'll be like, why didn't you text me back as quickly?
yeah,
Like, what's going on? Oh, they hate my guts. They hate me. They're gonna leave. Oh my gosh. And
yeah.
then doing that so much and focusing on the little things, I missed out on some of the red flags that maybe I shouldn't even be around these people to begin with.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's learning, and then as also what I found with the Pete Walker work, that as I've learned to reparent myself and be a mother and a father to my inner child, I'm far more I'm protective, but I'm not overprotective, but I'm also very much more nurturing to myself. I've
Absolutely.
so the nurturing, and also allowing myself all of my emotions and my sadness and my joy and my tears, and not punishing myself for having normal, healthy feelings anymore.
Absolutely. I'm on that journey right now. I'm working on it.
And
But I
the
think it's super important. This is something that I've noticed. I'm pretty sure it just applies to more like my demographic of people, like my peers and things like that.
okay,
Because, like I said, out here, the wait list is so long that you have to work with what you can get when you can get it. But I think that no one talks about how you're supposed to go to therapy. Every time you reach out or you're in a crisis mode, everyone tells you, okay, go to therapy and go work that out, but they don't tell you necessarily how, especially if you have limited access to
yeah,
those resources. I definitely think that you have to be prepared going in to get
I
the
would
most out of it that you can.
I would say, and I was very lucky that for me that I'd read because if I'd not read the Pete Walker book before I'd gone into therapy, I wouldn't know what the hell was going on.
Exactly.
I didn't, so I went with the baseline of understanding the complex PTSD. So the complex PTSD book from Pete Walker is not the only book. We know that there are many books out there
Of
that
course.
cover this, but that was the one. And then another one that he wrote was the Tao of Fully Feeling, which is this one here. You see that there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I had these, but because I'm doing these the Wednesdays and Saturdays on Meetup now, and women come, it's a women's thing where anybody can join it from anywhere because it's online. The Meetup thing where I'm reiterating these books to other people, so it's like I've almost allowed myself to speed up that knowledge because the input keeps going in. I haven't stopped, with that input of understanding it, and the big aha moments like, oh my God, I'm being abusive towards myself, or I've got
Exactly.
this inner critic that's bashing me or slighting me or telling me that I'm not good enough. And when we begin to reverse that stuff, the inner critic, it's an ongoing journey. That's and the Pete Walker where he says it's not all or nothing. Healing is not like this all
It's
or
not
nothing.
linear. Healing isn't linear.
And it's not lovely word. I love that word. And also how it's not we don't know when we're going to get triggered. Like, there are days when, but the beauty of it is the more we do this work, the less time we spend in those triggers. Like for me, I used to spend days or weeks. Now I can get triggered by something. I did this afternoon on a particular thing. I won't go into detail. I got triggered and it lasted. Then I had a good little bitch to myself about it,
Of course.
I got it out. And to myself, when I was walking, I had to go out and get something shopping, and I had a moment to myself, and then I got it off my chest, and I messaged a friend who understood, because we need people who also understand this process, because we don't want to be
very
abandoned.
Important to have understanding people. You need to have a community if you're going to work through these things.
Yeah.
You need to have your own support system.
Yeah. So tell me more about this and the response you left it at, that you went, you basically had the testing.
Yeah. So I had my brain waves monitored, and every once in a while I'll go in for another MRI or another CAT scan. And then it got to the point where they were like, well, we don't know what's wrong with you, so we're just going to give you this epilepsy medication and see what happens.
Wow. Okay.
So then they just started like feeding me different combinations of pills to try to stop the effects. And I'll also get migraines as well. So they would put me on migraine medication and epilepsy medication, and just like, okay, we'll see what happens. And it took me another, I want to say 6 or 7 months before I actually got a concrete diagnosis. And it was because I had been in and out of the emergency room so much, because I would be out and about at the store, out and about at therapy, for instance, and I would just fall out and start convulsing, especially after therapy appointments, because everything's kind of raw when you first come out of a therapy appointment. Everything's like in the forefront of your mind, and so you're way more susceptible to being triggered. So I would just wake up and be in an ambulance. And so I kept going so much, and I was like, okay, it's getting to the point where it's affecting my daily life. I can't hold down a job. I can't go to the store. I can't walk around my own house and do anything without waking up somewhere with my head hurting.
That must be very distressing. I mean, I don't know how, like to cope with that. I mean, how did you, when that, but how did that affect you? Did it scare you, or where were you at when these things were happening?
I was actually living alone, so it was pretty scary because sometimes I would go into town and try to go run some errands, or I'll go looking through colleges and see which college I wanted to go to in that area, because I just moved to that area. And then I would like, and the horrible thing about it is I actually developed a sense of like when they're coming. So like it kind of helps because there's a couple of precursors to let me know I might have a seizure.
So like an intuition.
So it helps.
Intuition.
It helps, and at the same time it's terrifying, because then I'm like scrambling, like let me make sure I'm sitting down, or let me make sure I lie myself down somewhere, make sure if I'm with someone who doesn't know that I have these, to let them know, okay, I'm probably gonna have a seizure right now, it's okay, don't freak out. Because I've had people literally like cry because they don't know what's going on. Like 1 minute we're talking and we're laughing and we're joking, and then I just fall over and start like foaming and like convulsing, and they're like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. They're on the phone with like the ambulance and the police, and they're crying and they don't know what's going on, and I'm like, this happens 15 times a day.
Okay.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to scare you.
Yeah.
So there's certain symptoms that will let me know. I'll typically feel like lightheaded or dizzy, get black spots in my vision, my hearing will kind of fade away, and then nothingness, and it will kind of feel like I took a nap, but a really stressful nap. And
Yeah.
then I'll wake up and I'll be like, oh, it's been like 20 minutes, and I've just been convulsing, and then I just passed out. Like, um, but it sucks because there's a lot of stigma surrounding it. A lot of people thought I was faking. A lot of people thought that I was faking about what was going on with me, and I was just doing it for attention. I was just doing it because I was lazy and didn't want to do anything. And I was like, do you think I will really fall head first onto the ground
Yeah. I get
on
you. I mean,
purpose?
people can, this is the thing, and I think with trauma responses, it's very difficult for people. Well, I know that when I would get triggered, that I couldn't help the way I was, feeling at times. I just want to show you something actually. Let me just do something here briefly. What I want to do is bring this up, and oh, hang on a minute, come out of that. I want to do this. I just want to show you. I'm going to share my screen briefly. Are you okay with that with battery and whatever?
Yeah.
Got enough charge? Okay, so let me just show you this. Let me bring this up. Let me do this for a minute. I just want to show you this. So this is really from Pete Walker's book, not this, here. So explaining this, I don't know if you can see this if you're on a phone, but I'll read it anyway. These are the trauma
Okay.
responses really from Pete Walker's book. So the fight is it's an anger outburst. The fight response is an anger outburst. It's where we can be controlling, the bully type thing. It can be narcissistic and explosive behavior. So all of these four are quite normal, that we have them in order to survive. Like in the wild, if we were in the wild, like 1,000 years ago, I don't know how many when dinosaurs existed on Earth. My history isn't that good, but I would say that we have normal fight response, flight, freeze, and fawn in order to keep alive.
Absolutely.
So the fight response, the flight is where we can be workaholic, overthinker, anxiety, panic, OCD, difficulty sitting still, and perfectionist. So I'd spend a lot of time in the flight mode. I wouldn't really go into the fight mode unless I really felt like I was being abandoned. Then I'd go into the fight. The freeze, I do still do that on occasion when maybe I can do that with paperwork, or when I have to do something official forms. I find that very difficult. It can be very disconcerting, because I was never allowed, when I asked for help when I was a child, when I reported what was happening to me when I was around 10, I got penalized for that. I was told off by adults for bringing up. I was told not to say what I was saying, that as if I was making it up. Yeah. The fawn is where we can be a people pleaser. It's a lack of identity. We have no healthy boundaries. We're overwhelmed, and codependency. So I'll just come out of that and stop share. So that's useful when we can begin to see that so simply. We can say, oh, that's what I'm doing. And when we begin to relate to it, we can begin to evolve it. We can go, oh, okay, that's the inner critic. That's what's going on. So
Absolutely.
psychoeducation is so important in this healing game.
It's very important to make sure we put it in terms that people can understand.
Yeah.
And literally, it's like my life's work. Like, this is what I spend all of my time doing. I just find people who are going through things, and I'm like, hey, guess what that is? Let me help you and tell you what's going on and how do you fix it. Like, I'm everyone's like personal therapist. Like,
that's beautiful.
I've been referred to as the mom friend. I've been referred to as the therapist friend. I'm always popping up with like new terms, like, hey, check that out. You might be doing that. Figure it out.
What do you think your with your future, like as a young woman that you are? I can say that because what would be your ideal? Like you want to help people to evolve their traumas and understand them. What's your plan for yourself?
That's been what I've been doing for the past few years. So like I've done a lot of volunteering at places like that. I've done a lot of volunteering at therapy places and where they do group therapy, and I've tried helping out grief counseling and things like that. But my end goal is to be a teacher.
What sort of, is it something you want to teach specifically, or you just want to be an all-rounder teacher type?
Just kind of an all-rounded teacher, because I just feel like the earlier I can get to people, the younger I can get to them, and the more knowledge I can impart, and hopefully it'll sink in easier the younger that they are.
Have you
So I
done
kind of
any,
just want to teach like smaller kids.
yeah, have you done any videos like this before? Is this your first type of video that you've
Yeah, this
done?
is my first video.
I'm sure it'd be the first of many, and I'm sure that that you'll do many. I mean, you come across so beautifully, and so I feel, and I don't want to go on the age thing, but it's just so really good to see, the younger generation out there with their heads screwed on so well, and that because I think a lot of the younger generation get a lot of flack. Do you know what I mean by that?
Very
It's, like not
very true.
being, not, I hear people say, that about respect and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, I thought there's so, it's not an age thing, and it's not, but people can generalize about who we are,
Yeah,
like we're
it's a
generalized,
maturity thing.
like, do you find that, I mean, do you find that, or do you find a mix of people, depending on where they're coming from with their views?
For the most part, I've a lot of the younger people, we're a lot better than they give us credit for. I've noticed that when we our generation blows up on social media because of something stupid we're doing, or we're in the media because we're like eating Tide Pods or whatever we're doing,
Yeah.
it's usually just like the few. It's usually just like 5 or 6 people out there doing dumb stuff, and
Yeah.
then they're like, you guys are all like this. And I'm like, most of us have
Yeah.
so much healing to do because of the generation before us didn't heal properly,
Yeah.
that most of us are extremely mature for at a very young age.
So you would have been born. So then, if you're because I was a '60s baby, so I was born in '66. So if you're 22, so you're basically the late '90s, the
Yeah.
late '90s, and then and in astrology we see the generations, like the difference of the generations and how people, the different things that people are having to heal and deal with, and definitely my generation, born in the '60s, so just a bit of, so you can maybe see where your generation has had to take on other people, your stuff.
Yeah.
But for the generation I was born into, the 1965, 1966 babies, or the late '60s, '70s, a lot of the parenting then, the contraceptive pill was just invented. So what
Oh
it
my
meant
God.
was it gave a lot of people a lot more freedom. So whereas maybe in the '50s people were a bit more conservative, yeah,
Right.
and a bit more conservative, then when the pill came along, the contraceptive pill, it gave people the freedom to not, because I would have been a baby, or not even, '66, but the parents of that generation, of my generation, would have had that freedom, and also there would have been the use of psychedelic drugs. So clearly not everybody was doing that, but there would have been Woodstock. You may have heard of Woodstock in.
Hmm.
So when we look back at what we've had to contend with, like, if we look at babies now, like a baby being, a baby maybe that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years old now, all of those babies have got mothers who are probably on their phones, or not looking at looking after, them.
Right.
They're sort of distracted with technology, you know.
Right.
So every
And I
generation
can
has
definitely
its.
tell the difference in children. I do a lot of babysitting as well.
You do a lot of
So
what?
I do a lot of babysitting. I just love little babies.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of babysitting as well, from a bunch of different families and things like that. And you can definitely tell the difference between children who have parents who are distracted and children who have parents who are more involved.
Yeah. So there's good enough parenting. Pete Walker mentions it in his book. There's good enough parenting. It's not perfectionist parenting, because none of us are perfect, and
Of course.
that's beautiful. That's just part of being human. And we want to get rid of any of the perfectionist type thinking anyway, because otherwise we berate ourselves. I used to berate myself in, really hatred, looking in the mirror, for instance, when I was having thoughts of anger and being upset, but I didn't understand that anger needed a release. Like, I needed to healthy anger and healthy rage. And when we're cut off from those emotions, and we have arrested development, which Pete Walker would say, from childhood, where we've not been allowed to say, like, for instance, when I was a child, I wasn't allowed to say, no, don't touch me, leave me alone. and
Right.
mummy didn't come and save me. So that generation, and of course a lot of people during that generation, because we have the abuse of the Catholic Church. It's not only that period, but that where it was all swept under all swept away, and it's, don't talk about it, it's not happening. But again, I just do know that that wasn't just my generation, it's also happened a lot in your generation as well. It's not,
Absolutely.
but still people are not really vocalizing, and verbal abuse and sarcasm and just basically not communicating with children properly. It's very bizarre. It's like, where do we say we draw the line? And we say, well, they didn't mean what they did because they were young, or they didn't know any better. In a way, I think we need to stop buying that BS idea.
Honestly, I'm such a huge person about, like, I say this to everyone I know all the time. I hate cop-outs when it comes to abuse.
Yeah.
I can't stand cop-outs. Like, okay, you've been through a rough childhood yourself, and a lot of people who go through abuse and trauma in their lifetime could go on to be perpetrators.
Yeah.
Just because I understand how it happens doesn't mean it's okay.
Yeah.
Just because it makes sense to me and I have empathy for that process of how you got there, and I feel bad for how you had to grow up, does not mean that you were excused from the actions that you make once you are an adult with your own sound mind.
And also not excusing, which is very difficult for people to understand because of the religious and the spiritual ideology and whatever people believe, that we can all, there are extenuating circumstances which we can come to in our own healing. We may come to in our own healing about the parenting that we received or the lack of parenting, but that's not to be forced onto us by outside forces telling us that we should forgive, and it's the only way, because
Absolutely.
trauma is trauma, and it needs to be worked through in a healthy way. It gets shed in a healthy way, not in a forced, fake, way of
trying to do it the way people tell you to recover.
Yeah.
I actually had a point in time when I was in school. I think I was in like 8th grade.
What is 8th grade? How old is 8th grade? I wouldn't know.
I was 14.
Okay.
I was 14 because I was 15 going into 9th grade. Yeah, so I was about 14 years old, and I was still in an abusive household. And I just got to this point where, because especially when I was younger, I was always in my fight response.
You always what? Sorry,
in my fight response.
In your fight or flight?
Yes.
Flight or fight? Fight.
Yes.
The fight. Yeah. And the fight is very difficult for, but I've been there, and there's no control over it when you're in it. It's like you can really.
I used to actually like black out. Like I used to have like total blackouts and would wake up, and I had gotten to like several fights and broken stuff. And I used to sleepwalk really badly as well. Like I would sleepwalk and go get knives out of the drawer and like just like stay in a corner to myself. Yeah. Like it was really traumatizing for people around me. But I remember I was talking about the abuse that I was going through, and I was so upset because I felt like no one was really hearing me, and it was the first time I had actually come out of my shell enough to actually vocalize what was happening. And so I was telling a group of friends while I was in class the things that were going on in my house, and I remember she totally dismissed me.
She was just grade, like, was it? That was 8th grade. Yeah.
Yeah, 14 years old. Yeah. And I had finally told my group of friends, like, this is why I'm always sad. This is why I can never go anywhere. I'm going through this, that, and the other. And she was like, yeah, because your life is so bad because you get to go to school and you have food in your belly and you have a shirt on your back.
Oh, so I've heard this stuff.
Like, and I was so crushed.
Yeah.
Because it was the very first time I had ever spoken out. I was so crushed, especially because she was supposed to be one of my friends. And I remember I was just like, I just shut down. Yeah. And I was just like silent for a long time. I was silent. And then I remember one day I just got like this wave of clarity where I was like, well, I don't care if you don't like it. I'm going to project my voice. Like I'm going to tell everybody who will listen. I'm going to tell everybody everything all the time. Yeah. Like just out of spite, just out of vengeance. Like I'm going to tell everybody every single thing. And I had been that way once I hit like 15, I want to say it was over. Once I hit 15,
It had to come
I
out.
was, yeah, absolutely. I
So
was
in,
so enraged.
so it's
Because
in,
it got to the point I had eating disorders. I used to self-harm. So it got to the point where like I had so much anger turned into myself that and it wasn't working. So I just had to
do you know
point it outwards.
what I would say? It's very not, it's very interesting as well that self-harming, and that's not something I did. I mean, I self-harmed in other ways. I drink alcohol, so we do self-harm in different ways, but the self-harming of the body, I know that people in sort of in their 20s, 25, that sort of age group, have 20, that sort of age group of, whether it's like where these things come from. It's not a new thing, but where things become more popular. I'm not saying
That's true.
popular, but
yeah, no, I know what you mean totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like what?
Yeah, because there's a lot of people in my age group who have self-harmed.
Yeah, I mean, I know I saw an article on the COVID thing. We won't have to go into COVID, but just as an example of where a lot of young people in Japan are taking their own lives at the moment because they can't cope with what's going on with but not so much that, but with them. I know that there was a family member that I know that was doing the self-harming. So whether I mean, and for me, it's just a different sort of self-harming, where if you're drinking a bottle and a half of wine a night, that is self-harming.
Right.
Have you heard of Amy Winehouse? You heard of
Yes, of course.
Okay, so in 2011, she died. And I wasn't particularly into her music, but I didn't dislike her, but I didn't particularly, if it was on the radio.
Yeah, I like a few of her songs.
Yeah, but
she was gorgeous.
Yeah, I didn't buy, I wouldn't buy an album, but some of her tunes were, but very clearly, a lot of trauma there, and you could see it, whatever's gone on, and when she died of the alcohol, in part that she was addicted to alcohol, heavy alcohol, and I think that scared me enough to think, oh my God, that could be me if I keep, because you can't keep consuming that much and stay safe. And you can get yourself into all sorts of different difficulties as well with alcohol, where you might you put yourself in dangerous situations just by being around people and not being completely
right.
I mean, I don't know with your generation, with alcohol and drugs. I know that maybe there was a generation, do you see in your generation that it's different, that that your generation is using different things, or are they not, or they that interested?
No, yeah, my generation, a lot of people that I know in my generation, they are mixing new shit together. Like they're doing all types of stuff. Like people are drinking cough syrup now. Like that's a thing.
Oh,
people are drinking cough syrup now. They're popping pills and drinking cough syrup and doing like 3 different mixing uppers and downers. Like just they're doing everything. Like they're doing everything.
But this is the thing where where things, we go in these cycles where things change. So as I said to you, the 60s, I was a baby, the parents would have not, I'm not saying all parents, clearly, if every parent on planet Earth was doing that, we'd have blooming chaos, but there would have been a particular, where people were chilling out, meditating, and like, let's go and let's do mushrooms or whatever they were doing. And then that was that generation, and then it went through another generation where in the 80s, when we had Wham and all of that, and the 90s and alcohol, and so different generations do different things. And
absolutely,
and we have to work them out. But I think that it would be nice actually to hear a bit more about what you've how far you've with the diagnosis you had, and then you had the medication. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that as well?
So they put me on several different types of medication. I was on an epilepsy medication and a migraine medication. And then I would just have to go in every 3 months and tell them how the medication was working. Okay. It wasn't really helping. Like it made me drowsy. That was like the only thing. I was still having seizures just as much, if not more than before. My migraines, sometimes they would be better. It was kind of like a hit or miss type of thing. Sometimes they would just be really bad and nothing would help them, and sometimes the medication would kind of help because they would make me drowsy and I could go to sleep and sleep through them. And then it got to the point where I finally booked an in-hospital stay. So they were like, we don't know what's going on and nothing seems to be working and you're getting worse. And like, so just come into the hospital, stay for 10 days, and then we'll monitor your brain waves
Wow.
that way.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so I came in. I got in my hospital bed. It was awful. They were like trying to get me to use a bedpan and everything because I was hooked up to a computer, so I couldn't leave my bed.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I couldn't go to the bathroom. So they had me hooked up. There were so many wires hooked up to the computer, and then they had my IV, of course, and then they had um, something else that was connected to the computer outside of the room so they can monitor. So there's just a bunch of different stuff like sticking out of my head, and I had like all these bandages wrapped around my head and like my IV in. And I stayed there, and it was beautiful because I went in thinking I was gonna have to spend like 10 days there. I only ended up having to stay like 3. So I stayed 3 days, and I had several seizures there. And they're monitoring my waves and watching me, but they're also video recording me as well to see how my body reacted at the same time as my brain waves.
Okay.
And they were like, they came in right after I was having a seizure, I believe. I like just woke up and was kind of confused, and I also get like really bad body pains, like muscle pain also. So I'll wake up like really sore and like confused, and I'm halfway awake, and the doctor comes in and he's like, all right, you can go home, we figured it out. We know what you have now.
That's really brilliant. After 3 days.
Yes,
After
3
three
days
days.
instead of 10.
Okay. So then what happened? What happened then?
So basically, they were like, this is something they only have, I think he said about 10 years of experience with this illness. It's fairly new. There's barely any information on it. And he brought me the informational pamphlet with all the information about it on there. And he was like, okay, so have you been through any, I didn't even tell them. He was like, have you been through any type of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse? Have you been through any type of abuse? And I was like, all the ones you just listed, yes.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, that's what it is. We got you.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, so basically, you when you get triggered, you seize.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what they told me.
So
And
that would
they gave
be
me a
in a way, I mean, to be, like I've watched myself, through this COVID thing where I've gone into freeze on certain things, freeze, and,
Mhm.
a bit of abandonment went on in my life at the time that I was going through the last year, because a year ago this week was when lockdown happened in Italy, and then it sort of went through the world. Do you remember that in Italy and the Europe, they
Yes.
closed down, and then it was country after country, and I think there was lockdown, and then everybody was like, so I think that it's been a huge learning curve the last year for me, about myself, and my own anxieties about, am I going to get COVID again? Am I safe? Because I had it for 5.5, 6 weeks, and I did that all on my own. And nobody at the time, a lot of my friends, they said, oh, you just like the abuse thing, oh, you just got a cold, you don't know what you're talking about, because everybody was, but whatever it was, I don't care what the name was, I had it for 5.5 weeks, and it was really, really tough.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't care what the name was or the label of it was, but it's interesting that that in a way gave me a lot of growth as well in my own sense of self and my own direction in life. So sometimes these, with yourself, after those coming back to you, those 3 days after that, and they acknowledged that you'd been through, were having a trauma response. And I've seen
It was
myself with trauma
so
responses.
validating. It was so validating because I'd been struggling for like a year and a half. And I've even had EMTs of like when they were taking me and putting me into the ambulance, like telling me that I was faking and that nothing was wrong with me as they're dragging me out of my house and I can't walk because I'm passing in and out of consciousness.
Yeah.
I've had actual EMTs tell me nothing's wrong with you, walk to the ambulance, hurry up and go, da 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 da.
Well,
And then even friends telling me like, oh, you're just, you need to calm down, or it's not as bad as you're making it
let it
seem.
go, oh, just let
Yeah,
it, yeah, yeah.
just that flippancy, the
It's
like, and it's like,
bypassing, isn't it? Because the thing is that
yeah,
when we'd go into, I mean, I know as as an adult, being sexually violated, I still look under the bed before I get in it. I don't know how many adults do this, but I still do that. And I've got some OCD where I check the cooker hob to make sure it's off. It's a sense of safety. It's like, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So those
right.
items, you know, and I'm much better than I used to be. I used to do things like, you know, out of fear of, you know, perfectionism, not being perfect myself, but that something bad was going to happen. I'd have to hang the bathroom towels in a particular way with the label of the towel in a particular position, or put my linen on the bed like a blanket with, you know, when you get labels, the wash tag on to a particular way. Now I don't do that anymore, but you know, a lot of us do need therapy or something. You know, people have got to do what they've got to, whatever's right for them. I'm not saying
Whatever
therapy
works,
is for
whatever helps with
everyone.
that recovery, with that healing. And when you don't do that healing, there's consequences, and there's very real physical consequences of mental health issues.
Yeah.
But everyone thinks that it's just like everyone's like, well, just forgive. You'll
Or
be
I've even
fine.
heard, you know, oh, you know, like, why don't you have a nice holiday? And you're just thinking, you just, you know, or that, you know, you're, you know, when you've been abandoned, or you know, there's plenty of fish in the sea. I mean, it's just that depth of just
It's
not understanding, you know.
just that one size fits all type of thinking, that like, let me just give you this inspirational quote I saw on Instagram and that should fix it, that should help. It's like, no, there's so many levels, especially when you have compounded trauma from years and years and years of abuse. One traumatic event is bad enough, but when you have years and years and years and years,
Heavily
the whole
imprinted.
first 18, 19 years of my life were filled with trauma and abuse.
Yeah. And
it's
actually,
gonna take some time.
what you were saying at 14, that's when I stood up in my family, and that I was 14 and about 14 and a half, and I stood up and I said, you know, this has been happening to me. I mean, I'm sure there was an awareness of what had been going on, but you know, you can't prove those things to, you know, when people close their eyes in families and
Exactly.
you know, and people do it for their own reasons. You know, maybe they're not doing it on purpose, but I mean, I personally would never close my eyes to something, you know, that's horrendous. I'd say, hey, what the hell are you doing? You know,
right. But when you've already been through trauma yourself, and you're weaker minded, sometimes it's just your defense mechanism is just to kind of
not be there, not be in your body, not But I think for me, I've, you know, definitely learned to, you know, I'm a voice, and I've had to use my voice to keep myself, you know, to keep myself balanced.
Absolutely.
And you do lose people, because people, you know, it's not that you lose people because new people come in. I mean, you know, now I read Carl Jung. I read also, I do my evolutionary astrology, so I'm very deep into understanding on a very deep level of the psychology, my own shadow. Do you know what I mean by the shadow? Do you know what I mean by that?
Absolutely. I call mine the same thing, so I don't know if you mean the same thing.
What do you call it?
Me. I call mine the same thing as well, so I don't know if it's the same thing for you, but it's just kind of like the really negative side of me,
all the good parts of us that have been squashed down, you know, like where we might have wanted to excel at something and we're a bit genius about something, but we've had that squash, so that can be hidden in the shadow as well of the light of who we really are.
I've noticed that every time I work through a traumatic event, or every time I make my peace with a certain bit of trauma I've gone through, I come out remembering a love I had for something before that I totally forgot about.
Yeah. I did a beautiful drawing the other day. I'll show it to you, not now, but I've got some colors, and I've been doing some drawings. When I get stuck on an emotion, I've been using art pens and like watercolors, and also that's been really therapeutic for me. I've just started doing it. But Carl Jung, who was the founder of psychoanalysis, there was a guy in the US side who was James Williams, I believe, who was the founder in the 1800s of your side of. But in Europe, we had Freud, and Carl Gustav Jung, who was 20 years younger. But when we go back further, if we go back 500 years, like with Galileo and people like that, astrology was also a tool that people used. It was a form of psychology, because if you imagine that man, I say man, but I'm talking about, you know, all of us, would have been under the stars, and they would have been thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And they would have been you know, around fires, and people would have been contemplating the trauma of being human and the loss, you know, of being eaten by a dinosaur or whatever. Or, you know, it's so I don't think we can probably, you know, maybe bit rich to think that we could be in a trauma-free world, because everybody's at different levels of consciousness.
Exactly. So what might not be traumatizing to some can be and completely devastating to another.
Yeah. And the thing, as a result of that, there's always going to be people, people maybe that will abuse, but the more awareness we become, then things begin to change. Like, that isn't really okay that that's happening. And, what resources can there be? Like, what resources could there be for paedophilia to allow people to step up and say, hey, I've got a problem. Not the people that have been abused, but the people that have that desire to even go there with children, whatever the reasons. So, but there will always be that undercover, side, like we had in Hollywood, and the abuse of, you can have this part, I'll give you this part, but it's going to cost you blah blah whatever, to the feminine or whatever, and with the men as well. So, and we're evolving. So I don't think that we can rule out, a really beautiful, healthy world, but I don't think I'm going to see it in my own lifetime. But I do think that the more we've got this platform where we can voice and share, and without shame, then just one person hearing this conversation between you and I that's enough, That's
Absolutely
enough, even if somebody hears 5 minutes of something, go, wow, okay, I got something from that.
That is my hope with everything that I do, with everything that I get involved with every time I talk about mental health and try to share my knowledge. My hope is that I just create an environment where it's easier for someone like me to get help. That's all I want. I want someone to have a little bit of knowledge that they didn't have before, something to live for, something to keep them pushing until they can get somewhere safe, or to spark the mind that could actually go help someone who's like me, who can't get out herself.
Have you found resources local to you where you can help, because clearly you've got the ability with your consciousness, and how conscious you are for your younger years, that you've got this consciousness that's that's got a lot of clarity. So are you doing anything with that currently? Lockdowns going on, or are you
not currently, because all of the resources, like I said, I just moved here, but all the local resources that I have around here are all closed because of COVID. Okay. So I can't really work with anyone else. So I just kind of find my own way of doing it. Okay. So I just kind of reach, basically what you're doing with the group and everything. I'll go into the group or into other mental health spaces and just try to give out my knowledge, make sure I'm here if someone needs to talk about something or anyone has any questions. But before COVID, I was definitely volunteering with people. I was working on becoming a domestic violence advocate, actually.
Okay. And with the groups, I mean, there are lots of groups where, people do need this knowledge, and that they need somebody with a level head that's not just going to say, oh, get over it, and and then also we don't want the fantasy thinking of ping, I'm going to be really healed, and life is an ongoing, it's a wave.
Yes. Just like how self-love, there isn't a goalpost you reach. We're oh, I completely and utterly love myself. There's always going to be,
because there's always going to be moments throughout the day you think, oh my God, it's there's something that we might not, be at peace within ourselves when we look, but then there's other times when we can have a depth of compassion for ourselves, and and just know that we need a few tears, or we need to speak to somebody, or whatever.
And the goal is just to have a few more of those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
A few more moments of compassion.
Yeah. So tell me, before we finish up for today, so tell me, where are you at now in your process of your own healing with this journey of the seizure type thing that you've had?
Yes. Well, now I've actually, it was so validating to get the diagnosis in itself that about a month or so after that, they actually dwindled down, because someone had actually given grace to what I was going through instead of telling me I was faking, because I had doctors be rude to me.
So
and
what
everything.
happened? They toned down. Did you say they toned down?
Yeah.
So this is
I still have them.
Yeah.
I still have them, but just the sheer validation of knowing what's going on and not being so confused and so scared about what's going on with my body, it's definitely tapered down. I did just have one, I think about 2 days ago, but it used to be I would have 15 a day and couldn't do anything, was in bed all day.
Yeah.
And now it's just I have one every couple of days, which is so much better.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, I found also when I stopped with alcohol, I then got these allergy symptoms where felt like I couldn't breathe, but that was more psychosomatic than, like the anxiety, because when you go into fight flight, your breathing goes right up here. You're not breathing from the stomach, and you just,
Right.
and then I thought I couldn't swallow food, so when I stopped drinking, that's when all my problems, because I wasn't drinking wine, all of the, and the memories were always there. It's just that I was quite happily making money and, just disassociating. And
Right.
so then it makes sense now, but at the time, like you said, I was calling out an ambulance every other week saying, I can't breathe. I think there's something wrong. I can't, I was going into high level anxiety, to the point I think I wouldn't run a bath. I was afraid that, I was running water that much in the bath, because I was thinking, if I'm on my own and then something happens to me and I stop, just the crazy thinking of
Right.
panic. But that's when my doctor did the CBT, and then it really didn't work for me, the CBT. It was just not. And then I'd learned some of my own modalities. I learned the tapping one. I became a practitioner in the Faster EFT, the tapping thing that, maybe you don't, it's to do with memories. EMDR, I would like to.
I was looking into, I feel like EMDR might really help. I was actually trying to
Yeah.
look into where I could get some of that actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind trying that on a few things. I don't think I've done most of I can see that I've done a lot, but I wouldn't mind giving it a go, just to experience it, so that I can pass that information on in a authentic way to other people and say, yeah, actually, that is, like, I can say the Pete Walker book. Yeah, it's not it's not the only book, but it's one
Right.
understanding that's really useful to humanity, because
Absolutely.
it's helped me to vocalize and understand myself, and to share that knowledge. Yeah. So how would you like to end this? We've got, you got anything you'd like to say?
Um, I'm not sure.
Okay. But now you're sort of, you're in a good place, you see. I mean, I'm glad you
Yeah.
found me on
I
social
also
media.
realized cutting off, I have to be very careful of what I consume, both mentally and physically.
Yeah.
And just definitely cutting off a lot of toxic parts. Like I stopped messing with a lot of people. I stopped being friends with a lot of people because I realized that they weren't helping. They were kind of adding on to like the trauma and the
Yeah.
stress of kind of being re-traumatized. So once I just put the focus on myself and got away from everything and everyone that wasn't serving me, and was very careful about what I consume on social media and how much negativity I allow myself to see,
Yeah.
especially in America with like the police brutality and things like that.
And all of the
I
other stuff
just
going on. Yeah. The political and
so much,
everything. Yeah. It's
so
huge.
much.
I mean, you guys have really had it, with,
It's been ridiculous.
and then throwing in, fires and, and flooding
Everything
and
else. And then on top of that, I'm a queer woman. So to be a Black queer woman in America,
oh, wow. Yeah,
difficult sometimes.
I can imagine it, just so that it's like that, it compounds, doesn't it? Like the
Exactly.
ideas, because people can be so close-minded on so many different areas, so many different things.
So because especially going through the trauma that I went through, going through the abuse that I went through, that was already kind of like had a nice little basket of things I had to work through. And then I grew up as I got older and I realized my place in this world and how I was viewed by other people in this country. That added another layer to it. And then I got older and I was like, oh my God, I'm bisexual too. And then I was like,
well, good for you. So
geez, like I have
you
no
seem to know,
refuge. Like
you
there's
seem
always somebody
you seem to know who
debating
you
the
are, and I think this is the whole, the shadow work and the work of Carl Gustav Jung would be, and that therapy of that time is that to become whole, we don't reject any part of ourselves. Like, we can say, this is who I am, and this is, why I am this way, because I am this way. Because I was
exactly.
finding, one particular thing that, I had great difficulty with sleep for years. I just, because part of my trauma was going to sleep at night being disturbed without, we can imagine, for people listening, they may not understand what I mean, but I don't want to go too into deep detail, but being disturbed as a child at night, and, you know, not feeling safe to fall asleep until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then,
Right.
you know, having to defend myself to other adults who are my friends saying, why aren't you in bed yet? And just, you know, the questions, and then coming to accept who I am. It's like where I feel safe, what works for me, not having to box into the rules and regulations of, you know, you got to forgive this person and you have to do this and you have to be in bed by 10 o'clock at night and you have to, you know, all of this, you know, there's a lot of nonsense in this world. We're so unique, you know, we're
Very,
each
very
unique.
true. And I am lucky enough to be able to say that I got to a point in my life where I just stopped giving a fuck about what other people thought.
Yeah.
Because
And
I
you
just
think
realized you're never gonna understand because you're not me. You didn't go through what I went through.
and that is, you know, that's powerful at your, and I will say, I know I'm coming back to age, but I can honestly, I'm very impressed that we had with your the way you are and your knowledge at your age. And I know I'm bringing up age and maybe I shouldn't be
Thank you so much.
ageist. I'm being that, but you know, it's reality. It's like, you know, it's the reality of what we see, and it's given me, you know, a lot of, it's lifted me having this conversation with you, because
That's
I was thinking, you know,
wonderful.
because it's new for me. You know, normally I've been dealing with people who are around my age or maybe in their 30s, but you know, it's been a lovely experience, this chat with you, and I'm sure we'll do another one in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm just so excited about this opportunity. It was so fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you contacted me and we hooked up and did this, and we'll do more.
Absolutely.
But what I'm going to do, I'll end recording now, and then I'll catch up with you afterwards. I'll give you a little um call, and then I'll upload this to YouTube so that people can see it, and hopefully somebody gets some great stuff from this, because I think it's been a lovely, you know, packed with some good stuff for us. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Catch you later. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Penelope.
bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.